Imagine a small village where one man's defiance against tyranny sparked a rebellion that changed history forever. Today, we're diving into the awe-inspiring story of the Maccabees, a tale of courage, faith, and unyielding resistance. And trust me, you won't want to miss the twist at the end that still resonates with us today. If you love stories that blend history with heroism, hit that like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe for more epic tales just like this one. In the silent halls of Jerusalem's temple, shadows of defilement crept closer. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes issued a decree that shook the Jewish community to its core. Abandon the laws of their ancestors or face annihilation. Pagan idols now adorned the holy sanctuary, and the altar once consecrated to God became a place for sacrifices to Zeus. Among the faithful, fear wrestled with indignation. In hushed corners of Judea, families gathered, lamenting their plight. Some wondered, where was God in these dark times? Others, like Mattathias, a priest from the village of Modiin, were preparing to take a stand that would resound across the ages. The quiet village of Modiin became the birthplace of defiance. Mattathias was called to the square to perform a pagan sacrifice. Flanked by soldiers, an official sneered, "Obey the king, or your people will suffer." The priest's hand trembled, but not with fear. It was righteous anger. "I will never betray my God," he declared, his voice cutting through the tense air. A pagan villager stepped forward to offer the sacrifice. Mattathias, enraged, drew his sword, striking down both the villager and the official. "Follow me," he cried. His sons rallied to his side as villagers cast off their chains of fear. The Maccabean revolt had begun. As Seleucid forces descended upon Modiin, Mattathias and his followers fled into the Judean hills, carrying their sacred scrolls and makeshift weapons. The rebels sought refuge among the rugged terrain. By day, they trained in secret. By night, they prayed for guidance. Mattathias, though aging, became their unshakable pillar of faith. Around campfires, he spoke of the ancient deliverance from Egypt, inspiring his followers to believe that God had not abandoned them. Every clink of a sword against stone was a prayer, every sparring match an act of faith. The strain of leadership and the harsh conditions of the hills took their toll on Mattathias. On his deathbed, he summoned his sons. "Be strong and courageous," he urged them, "for the Lord fights with us." He entrusted the rebellion to Judas, his most capable son. Known for his unrelenting spirit, Judas Maccabeus would earn the name the Hammer. As Mattathias passed, the camp mourned but remained resolute. His death marked not the end, but the solidification of their cause. Under Judas' leadership, the rebels launched a daring raid on a Seleucid outpost. Outnumbered and under-equipped, they relied on surprise and divine favor. As dawn broke, Judas led the charge, shouting, "The Lord is with us." The clash of metal and the cries of battle filled the air. Against all odds, the rebels triumphed, securing weapons and provisions. This victory was not just tactical. It was a symbol that faith and courage could overcome even the mightiest empire. After their first victory, the morale of Judas Maccabeus' forces soared, but they soon faced a greater challenge: a well-armed Seleucid army marching toward Beth Horon. Outnumbered, the rebels turned to fervent prayer. Judas knelt before his men and invoked the stories of Joshua and the miraculous victories of the past. The next morning, as the two forces clashed, it became evident that their prayers were answered. The Seleucid army, disoriented by blinding sunlight and fierce resistance, faltered. Rebel slingers found their mark, and swordsmen pressed their advantage. When the Seleucid general fell, his troops scattered. The rebels stood victorious once more, the battlefield echoing with cries of triumph. Judas proclaimed, "Not by our strength, but by the will of the Almighty." With the Seleucid forces driven back, Judas turned his sights on the Temple of Jerusalem, desecrated by pagan idols. Upon entering, the rebels were overcome with grief and fury. The altar was defiled, sacred relics broken, and the air thick with the scent of burnt offerings to false gods. Judas ordered the cleansing of the temple. The rebels worked tirelessly to restore its sanctity, weeping as they removed the desecrations. On the 25th day of Kislev, they rededicated the altar and lit the menorah, its flames symbolizing hope and renewal. The festival of Hanukkah was born from this act of restoration, a testament to their resilience and faith. While the rebels celebrated, Antiochus fumed in his distant palace. Reports of Jewish defiance reached him like daggers. In a rage, he vowed to crush the rebellion personally. Gathering a vast army, he declared that Judea would be erased from history. However, Antiochus' health began to fail. Stricken with disease, he saw visions of his own defeat. His death came as a shock, but not before he issued an order for his generals to carry out his campaign of destruction. The shadow of his decree loomed over Judea as his successors sought to fulfill his vendetta. Even as Judas and his forces achieved military victories, pockets of Jewish communities remained under Seleucid oppression. One such story unfolds with a mother and her 7 sons, captured and brought before a Seleucid governor. They were commanded to eat pork in violation of Jewish law. Each refused, even under threat of death. One by one, the sons were tortured and executed, their mother standing steadfast, encouraging them to remain faithful. Her final words echoed through the ages. "The God of our ancestors will raise you up in the resurrection." Her unwavering faith became a beacon for those still in the grip of persecution. On the eve of a decisive battle, Judas Maccabeus received a vision. In a dream, he saw the prophet Jeremiah, adorned in priestly robes, handing him a golden sword. "Take this, for it is a gift from God. With it, you will strike down your enemies." Judas awoke, invigorated by the vision. He shared the dream with his men, who saw it as a divine assurance of victory. Inspired, they marched into battle with renewed determination. The golden sword became a symbol of their divine mission and the unshakable faith driving their resistance. The Seleucid army, now led by General Lysias, prepared a massive offensive at Bethsur, a key stronghold. Judas' forces fortified the position, knowing the battle would determine the fate of their rebellion. The clash was fierce, with waves of Seleucid troops storming the fortress walls. But the rebels held firm, invoking the Almighty in every breath. Suddenly, the tide turned as a freak storm battered the Seleucid forces. Rain muddied their advance, and lightning struck their ranks. The rebels seized the opportunity, routing the enemy. It was another victory attributed to divine intervention. After the stunning victory at Bethsur, Judas Maccabeus knew the fight was far from over. The Seleucid Empire, though wounded, had vast resources to draw upon. Reports arrived of new reinforcements marching from Antioch. These forces were led by Nicanor, a ruthless general infamous for his cruelty and his mockery of Jewish customs. Nicanor boasted that he would raze Jerusalem to the ground and sell its people into slavery. Judas prepared his forces for what would be one of the most critical battles of the revolt. On the eve of battle, Judas called his men together, reminding them of their past victories and the divine hand that had guided them. "The Lord of hosts has delivered us before," he proclaimed. "He will do so again." They spent the night in prayer, the flicker of torches illuminating their determined faces. The day of the battle arrived. Nicanor's forces vastly outnumbered the rebels, their ranks gleaming with polished armor and deadly spears. Yet, Judas' forces stood undeterred, their faith a shield stronger than steel. As the armies clashed, it seemed the rebels would be overwhelmed. Suddenly, the tide shifted, inspired by Judas' rallying cry and recalling the vision of the golden sword. The rebels surged forward with a ferocity that stunned the Seleucids. Nicanor himself was struck down, and his death sent the enemy into disarray. The battlefield was soon littered with fallen soldiers, and the survivors fled in panic. The rebels claimed a hard-fought victory, proving once again that faith could overcome insurmountable odds. With Nicanor defeated, the Maccabees turned their attention to fortifying their newly reclaimed territories. Judas oversaw the construction of walls and the restoration of damaged villages. But his focus was always on the spiritual health of his people. He ordered the copying of sacred texts that had been destroyed and reinstated the traditional festivals that had been forbidden under Seleucid rule. The rededication of the temple became a focal point of this spiritual renewal, with prayers, sacrifices, and songs of praise filling the air. The people began to see their struggle not just as a fight for survival, but as a covenant with God to uphold their faith in the most trying of times. As the rebellion gained momentum, internal divisions began to emerge. Some among the Jewish leaders sought to negotiate with the Seleucid Empire, believing that compromise would bring peace. These factions accused Judas of being too reckless, warning that his defiance would bring further devastation. The Seleucids exploited these divisions, sending envoys with promises of leniency in exchange for loyalty. Judas, steadfast in his convictions, rejected these overtures. "Shall we forsake our God for fleeting promises of peace?" he asked. His rejection of compromise led to the defection of several key allies, who sought to undermine his leadership. Judas was left to face not only external enemies, but betrayal from within, with internal divisions weakening the rebellion. The Seleucid forces mounted a massive counteroffensive. They aimed to crush the Maccabees once and for all. Judas called his dwindling forces together for one last stand. "The odds are against us," he admitted, "but God has never forsaken his people. If we fall, let it be known that we stood for truth and faith until the end." The final battle was a brutal and chaotic affair, with the rebels fighting desperately against overwhelming numbers. Judas led from the front, his golden sword flashing like a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Though his forces were ultimately overwhelmed, their courage and faith left an indelible mark on history. Judas fell in battle, his final act a testament to his unwavering commitment to God and his people. Though Judas perished in battle, the spirit of his rebellion endured. His brothers and remaining followers carried on the fight, eventually securing a measure of independence for Judea. The story of the Maccabees became a rallying cry for oppressed peoples, a symbol of the power of faith and resistance. The rededication of the temple continued to be celebrated as Hanukkah, a lasting testament to the sacrifices made by Judas and his people. Their story reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage, faith, and unity can prevail. What would you have done if you were in Mattathias' place, standing at the crossroads between faith and fear, sword in hand, and the fate of your people resting on your shoulders? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you fight, flee, or find another way? After Judas' death, his brother Jonathan assumed leadership of the Maccabean forces. Unlike Judas, Jonathan faced not only military challenges but also political ones. The Seleucid Empire was embroiled in internal strife, and Jonathan saw an opportunity to leverage their chaos. He entered into diplomatic negotiations with rival factions of the Seleucid court, skillfully playing them against each other. This strategy brought temporary peace and recognition of Jewish autonomy in Judea. However, the price of leadership weighed heavily on Jonathan. He struggled to unite the remaining rebel factions and mourned the loss of his brother, often seeking solace in the quiet moments of prayer. His faith, though tested, never wavered. As tensions with the Seleucid Empire reignited, Jonathan faced one of the most harrowing episodes of his leadership, the siege of Jerusalem. Seleucid forces surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and demanding surrender. The people of Jerusalem, already weary from years of conflict, began to despair. But Jonathan, invoking the memory of Judas' courage, rallied the defenders. He led daring raids against the besiegers, disrupting their supply lines and bringing much-needed food into the city. Through sheer resilience and faith, the defenders endured the siege, and the Seleucids were eventually forced to withdraw. The victory reinforced the belief that divine intervention was on their side. Realizing that the Seleucids would remain a constant threat, Jonathan sought alliances beyond the borders of Judea. He sent envoys to Rome, which was rising as a dominant power in the Mediterranean. The Roman Senate, impressed by the Maccabean resilience, agreed to a treaty of friendship and protection. This alliance marked a turning point in Judea's struggle, as it provided a counterbalance to Seleucid aggression. However, the decision was not without controversy. Many in Judea questioned the wisdom of aligning with a foreign power, fearing it would compromise their independence. Jonathan's decision underscored the delicate balance between faith and pragmatism in leadership. Despite his successes, Jonathan's leadership came to a tragic end. Invited to negotiate peace by a Seleucid general, he walked into an ambush, captured and executed. Jonathan's death left the Maccabean movement leaderless and vulnerable. The people of Judea mourned the loss of another hero, their grief compounded by fears of renewed Seleucid aggression. Yet, in their sorrow, they found strength, rallying behind Simon, the last surviving brother of the Maccabees. Simon vowed to honor his brother's legacies and continue their fight for freedom. Simon, the last of the Maccabean brothers, brought a new vision to the rebellion. Understanding that his people were weary of war, he sought to consolidate the gains of the revolt and focus on rebuilding. Under Simon's leadership, Judea enjoyed a period of relative peace and stability. He strengthened alliances, fortified cities, and ensured the temple remained the center of Jewish life. Though not without challenges, Simon's reign symbolized a culmination of the Maccabees' sacrifices, a hard-won autonomy for Judea. Simon's leadership marked the beginning of a new era for Judea. Under his guidance, the Maccabean revolt transitioned from a desperate rebellion to a legitimate government. Simon was recognized as both the high priest and leader of Judea, consolidating religious and political authority. This dual role symbolized the unity of faith and governance that the Maccabees fought to preserve. The Seleucids, weakened by internal strife, formally acknowledged Judea's autonomy in exchange for peace. For the first time in centuries, the Jewish people governed themselves. Simon's era was characterized by rebuilding. Cities were fortified, trade routes reopened, and the temple restored to its former glory. However, Simon remained vigilant. Knowing that peace was fragile, he often walked the city walls at night, pondering the sacrifices that made their freedom possible. As Simon aged, the governance of Judea transitioned into the hands of his sons. This marked the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty, a lineage born from the courage of the Maccabees. While the early Hasmoneans adhered to the principles of their forebears, tensions arose as power and politics began to erode their spiritual foundations. The descendants of the Maccabees struggled to balance the ideals of faith and governance, leading to internal divisions and external conflicts. The seeds of future discord were sown, yet the memory of Judas, Jonathan, and Simon remained a rallying cry for unity. The Maccabean revolt left an indelible mark on Jewish theology, particularly in its emphasis on martyrdom and resurrection. The mother and her 7 sons who chose death over disobedience became enduring symbols of faith and sacrifice. These stories resonated deeply with later Jewish and Christian traditions, shaping beliefs about divine justice and the afterlife. The concept of resurrection, briefly mentioned in earlier texts, became a cornerstone of hope for those facing persecution. Early Christians saw parallels between the Maccabean martyrs and their own, drawing inspiration from their steadfast faith. The legacy of the Maccabees thus bridged 2 religious traditions, symbolizing the enduring power of belief in the face of adversity. The rededication of the temple gave birth to the festival of Hanukkah, celebrated annually to commemorate the Maccabees' victory and the miracle of the menorah. Families gathered to light the menorah, retelling the story of faith and perseverance. Each candle represented not just the days the oil burned, but the undying spirit of a people who refused to abandon their beliefs. Over centuries, Hanukkah evolved into a symbol of hope for Jewish communities around the world, a reminder that even in darkness, light could prevail. The legacy of the Maccabees was no longer confined to Judea. It became a universal testament to the power of faith. The story of the Maccabees continued to inspire oppressed peoples throughout history, from Jewish revolts against the Romans to modern movements for religious freedom. The Maccabean spirit became a symbol of resilience. Their narrative was retold in synagogues, churches, and even political movements, each finding in their tale a reflection of their own struggles. The Maccabees stood as a reminder that faith, courage, and unity could overcome even the most formidable of enemies. The courage and faith of the Maccabean martyrs resonated profoundly with early Christians, who faced persecution under Roman rule. The accounts of the mother and her 7 sons, their steadfastness in the face of death, became a model for Christian martyrs. The theology of resurrection, Central to the Maccabees story, found echoes in Christian writings, particularly in the teachings of Paul and the Gospels. For early Christians, the Maccabees symbolized the triumph of spiritual conviction over earthly power, a reflection of their own struggles to maintain faith in an oppressive world. Monasteries preserved these texts, ensuring their message endured through the centuries. In modern times, the story of the Maccabees continues to inspire Jewish and Christian communities alike. For Jews, Hanukkah remains a celebration of resilience and divine intervention. The menorah, burning brightly in homes across the world, is a testament to their enduring faith. For Christians, the themes of sacrifice, martyrdom, and the hope of resurrection remain deeply connected to the Maccabean narrative. The story is also a rallying cry for those fighting for religious freedom, reminding all that the fight for faith and justice is universal and timeless. The legacy of the Maccabees is not confined to the pages of history or the traditions of a single people. Their story transcends time, reminding humanity of the power of faith, unity, and resistance in the face of oppression. Whether in the flicker of the menorah's candles or the courage of individuals standing for their beliefs, the Maccabees live on. They inspire a world where the values of justice and freedom endure. In every act of defiance against tyranny, in every prayer uttered in hope, the spirit of the Maccabees burns as brightly as the flames they lit in the temple so long ago. The story of the Maccabees isn't just about battles and victories. It's about the enduring power of faith and courage. If this tale inspired you, give this video a thumbs up, share it to keep the flame of history alive, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength within us all. Until next time, remember, even the smallest flame can light the darkest night.